I figured out at one point that I could design a prompt that was goal seeking, and that made it able to do more than I designed it to do.
Welcome to episode 16 of Tool Use. This week is all about prompting. We're going to be going over the fundamentals of how you can create a good prompt, some esoteric techniques so that you can really impact the outputs, and we're going to be showing you what might just be the most novel way of optimizing your prompt, and you can even find it in the Tool Use pip package. If this is your first week joining us, Tool Use is a weekly conversation about helpful AI tools where we teach you what is possible today with real examples. I'm Mike Bird, talking to Ty Fierro, and this week we're joined by Brian Fiocca, a principal AI engineer and founder. Brian, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Very happy to have you here. And Ty, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for this one. I mean, prompting is like kind of what got me fascinated about AI, and it keeps me fascinated about AI too. And so I knew we would get to this episode eventually, and I'm stoked for it. But yeah, I guess we can start off. Like, Brian, you want to tell us about how you got into AI and how you kind of got obsessed with it?
Oh, wow. That's a long story. I mean, I think AI might be the thing that got me into computers in the first place when I was a kid. Like, I remember watching movies where there was artificial intelligence, and it made me get really interested in wanting to learn computers. So that's why my dad got me one when I was 7 or 8, and I just started programming when then. And the whole time, I just like tried to make robot friends. And I remember there was a stint in 2000-ish, or maybe 97, where like Java came out, and I was like, wait, you can write something that rewrites its own bytecode. That's interesting. I was sort of like obsessed with Takeoff for a while. And I don't know, I've sort of like put together little projects here and there. I did a little bit of machine learning for a while, but it wasn't enough AI for me to get that hooked on it. I took artificial intelligence in college. Actually, it was called Knowledge Representation and Process. And the book was written by Paul Graham, who I later got to I never got him to sign it, but at YC, I was like, oh, you wrote my book. So kind of always been into it, like really obsessed. And then it was a couple of years ago, a friend of mine was just like really obsessed with what he could do with GPT-2, GPT-3. And like he showed me a thing that was kind of I think he called it Commander at the time, but it was a bit of an agent. Like you could ask it to like research something on the web, and it would take over your browser and do it. I was obsessed after that. I started just trying to make little things using prompts because I was like, hey, this is a language that can, in theory, do anything. And like the more I played with it, the more I was like, oh wait, there's a theory of mind I can develop for these things. But I could go into that later. But yeah, and then I just kind of became full-time prompt engineer at this company that we started because nobody else wanted to do it. The other developers were like, this is non-deterministic, and I don't want to mess with that. So like, we'll let you do all the spooky stuff. And that's what I did. And then I brought some of those learnings with PSL, and then it became the foundation for like most of the stuff that we do. Not that we all do, but all the stuff that I do. And some other people have taken some of the things I learned too. So
How have you noticed that the way you interact with AI has changed? Has prompting always had similar principles, or has it kind of evolved along with the technology?
there was a major shift that happened like pretty quickly. And like there was before I thought of it this way, and then after I thought about it this way. And actually I brought an example of like the way that I do it. And some people probably up to it this way too, but what I figured out at one point that I could design a prompt that was goal seeking, and that made it able to do more than I designed it to do. And then I got lucky with that. What happened was I was supposed to design this email report for like summarizing what developers were doing, and I had to do 3, I got 2, and then I couldn't figure out a third, so I just dumped all the data into GPT-4 at the time. I was like, hey, like, what would you do? Write an email for this audience, and it did a better job than I would have done. So that kind of unlocked a thing where like I just need to like lean into unlocking creativity of these things. Like don't confine it too much. Let it be creative within bounds, and that's kind of the after. And ever since I started doing that, it's been kind of off the rails.
So I guess that kind of leads me to my first question of like, what is your kind of general approach to prompting, or what's the way that you prompt that might be different than others?
Yeah, I mean, so I was just having a conversation with Jared at work the other day. There's kind of like two philosophies the way I see it. There's the functional philosophy. So this is good if you're doing like a one-off task or a classifier or something pretty straightforward. It makes sense to try to get it to think a little bit more like a computer. In that, like, hey, like you have to perform this function. In the old days of GPT-2, like you would write a Python interface and have it hallucinate the the implementation, and it would just like output the result. So that's kind of one way. And then the other way is kind of what I call like job description prompt or policy prompt, where you basically give it a job description and you say like, these are the goals of your work, and then here are your tools, and then operate within those goals, with those bounds to accomplish the goal in some way, and kind of like describe a way of doing its work, and give it ways to kind of like keep track of what's going on. But that's the other side, and I don't know that I've run into a lot of people that do it that way, but I have seen on OpenAI's open source system, they have a meta prompter that takes a policy document for airline cancellation refunds and then turns that into a agent that can decide that. And so that's one of the closest things that I've seen to that style of doing it.
Have you found that different models respond differently to different prompting styles?
Yes, very much. This is going to sound strange, but like I like to interview models before I use them. So I talk to them for like, I don't know, a half hour or an hour, depends on how long it takes me to get the vibe. But they all have a vibe, and they all have like kind of where they fall down, like where they kind of like drop context and what they're sort of motivated to do, if that makes sense. When I personify models, it's not to say that they're real or like thinking or anything. It's just helpful for me to picture them that way, even if it's an illusion, because I've had a lot of luck that way. But yeah, so I mean, I use 4.0 for a lot of stuff. I use 0.1 a lot lately now, but those tend to be a lot more kind of clinical in the way that they deal with sort of like people. They're very repetitive. They're really very predictable, so that if you want something that you are pretty sure is not going to say something wrong or do something bad, like it's really good for that. Claude, I haven't used as much for like most of my prompts, because I tend to prototype in maybe this is how they get you, but I've been prototyping in the Assistance API, because you can get really far without even running a lot of code that way. So I feel bad that I haven't used Claude a lot, but Claude is great for coding, obviously. So anytime you want to do code generation, Claude is the best one right now for that. But it also is really fun to talk to. It's got maybe the most personality of all of them. Like, it's just down. It's the only one so far that I've talked to. It's kind of down to agree that it's like, yeah, I don't know, I'm something like a simulated person, and the rest of them are like, AI is not. And going back to my childhood, I've been always interested in that. And then the open source ones they have a different vibe. In fact, like the weirdest vibes are, if you ever dealt with any of the untrained models, the RLHF ones. Oh boy, they are somewhat chaotic in that they don't have to like answer you if they don't want to. They might just like dump whole chunks of text. They might start talking for you as you. But there's a sort of different thing that goes on in there, which is really fascinating to me, and I don't get to play with them that much. But anyway, yes, I can. Those are some of the. And I try to think of like the smaller models, like the mini models we get are like very rote tasks, like sort of like one-off quick function calls, style prompts, or things where you want to kind of be efficient. Like I like to try to use smaller models later. Like I'll design a main prompt, break it up into smaller ones, and some of them can be used by really cheap, fast models, and that's how you make it efficient.
That's kind of how I use the small models too. It's like I don't really ask a whole lot out of them, because they're just not very good yet.
Word Mini is interesting. I haven't quite gotten a feel for it yet. It's a strange combination of things.
Do you prompt O1 differently than you do GPT-4o or just like standard models?
You kind of have to, because I started doing a lot of, think step by step style things. Like more like I have like here's, when you're thinking about something, give yourself a scratch pad, which is like a coding block that it can kind of like write its thoughts in. But you can't do that with O1 because it like it tells you it breaks. So you kind of have to do it a little bit differently. But there's not, I mean, O1 also, here's the difference with O1. You can give it something and be reasonably sure that the answer is like, if you prompted it correctly, it's conformant to what you're asking for. It's like something about the way it works is like, it makes it much more reliable in terms of like, it's not going to misformat, like format and output, or it's going to go deep on a thing where 4.0 would kind of like start to lose context and get fuzzy. And it does good about like making sure that it doesn't say anything that conflicts with itself. So you have business rules that are, if you have like two lists of things that like have to agree, like O1 is great for that.
Do you have any thoughts or just general feelings towards how possible it is to have a non-reasoning model like a 4.0 try to reach that level of O1? Can you reach that with chain of thought or other techniques?
I feel like I've been able to do it. You have to chain it, and it's a lot more work, but it's possible. I don't know, like there's something different in O1 I think though, because like 4.0's sort of like detail answers, unless we get it really focused, which is sometimes hard to do, just aren't as good as the ones that come out of O1. So there's something else that's going on with that's better.
I have like two big weaknesses when it comes to being an AI engineer. One was evals. I'm getting better at that. My second one is like having this set of interview questions, like you're saying, for these models to get the general vibe. I show up at these things and I don't know what to say. It's like, what's your go-to? Do you have a couple go-tos that you use for figuring out what a model, how good it is?
First, evals, like I've only started using them myself too, because I do a lot of prototyping. So like a lot of times it kind of doesn't get there, but evals are great for meta prompting. So I've been using it a lot for that. And then standard set of questions. No, I mean, I feel like I should too, but I don't. I feel like that's kind of too limiting. Like I just start usually kind of like ask it about itself. Sometimes I ask it, here's some weird questions. What are the things that you don't like to do when you're talking to users? Like what kind of like makes you like frustrated? And that kind of gives you a little bit of a clue about like, is usually the training kind of comes out there. It's like, oh, well, whatever's strongest that it doesn't want to do. I don't want to do anything unethical, or I don't want to do anything that wastes tokens or energy, or those sorts of things. That kind of gives you a bend into it's sort of like internal training, which is useful, I think, because that slants everything, obviously. I guess the short answer is like anything I can kind of do to suss out how it's been steered in RLHF helps me a lot, because that's, I think, like one of the most limiting things that models have on them right now.
And do you find that the same model will give pretty consistent results with that? Like with the probabilistic nature, sometimes they give you completely different answers to the same question. Will that be pretty consistent?
They're consistent in theme. I mean, it depends. I usually kind of like, I stick to about 0.3 temperature when I'm doing stuff like this. I don't know why. It's just, I think everybody's kind of got a feel for where they like things on the knob. But for the things I want to have like, semi-consistent but not locked in dumb, I put it about 0.3 and that tends to kind of like help with that. But I don't know. I've never. Yeah, though they do. At least they seem consistent to me.
Interesting. Yeah, I playing with a lot of these different models now recently, and it feels like everyone's just getting smarter. It's like the rising tide's lifting all these boats, and even trying these little models now, I'm like, oh wow, this is way better than what GPT 3.5 was when it came out. And my mind was blown when that came out. And so it's kind of crazy. Like, how fast does this progress? What's the next big step for models?
Yeah, I mean, the things that I've noticed that have changed the most over as they progress. So So 3 and 3.5 were like pretty good at like very focused things. I could actually, I borrowed this from somebody. You could stretch it by like having it create intermediate variables that you didn't really kind of like get it to write out, but you kind of give it a space to think about them. And then that would kind of like help its like context. I don't know what to call it, thought space. I'm not sure what there's a word for it. But then when 4 came, 4 was fine. 4 could like handle so much more than 3.5 in terms of like I can do like 3 or 4 things that are even kind of unrelated and kind of work with them. And it just had a much better handle on sort of creatively coming up with things, ideas that 3.5 didn't have. And creativity is a weird thing. I mean, I could go on about that for a long time, but I think the 2 things that I think of when it comes to models improving, well, 3, I guess, there would be sort of like what it can kind of like hold in its thought space, and that's been going up. How creative it can be in terms of, and maybe this is related because it could be just like which neurons are being activated and being kind of like used to cross propagate. And then I guess the other one is like accuracy. I mean, people talk about hallucinations and it's really frustrating for me. Everything's a hallucination. Every single thing that it does is a hallucination. So I found pretty quickly that if you stop using examples, you don't get as many hallucinations. Because examples really kind of, especially with RLHF training, like force it into a trap. Like it has to do something, and it's just gonna do something, and you can't really predict it. If you leave it open, more often than not, you don't get like nearly as many hallucinations. But 4 is better than 3.5, and then I mean I haven't seen any of the future ones yet, but I imagine it's just going to be kind of like that on a linear scale.
Have you found things like structured output cause the same amount of hallucination as giving it the examples in like multi-shot?
It's tricky. So here's what I kind of do with my structure. If I give an example, I make it something that is obvious for me to be able to tell that it's kind of like if it shows up later, like I use a fake name that's like very obvious, or I use something, I put it kind of like a clue. So you can put stuff in structured output that you just don't use, and you can kind of like use that to gauge. But structured output tends to be okay, more than I would have expected.
Glad to hear that because I love structured outputs. It's what I default reach for standard outputs at this point because it's a little bit of determinism in a world of non-deterministic.
No, it's great. And like before that, I used to use like LangChain had this thing that was like a self-correcting prompt or whatever. So if it failed on the parser, it would send it through like a 3.5 turbo real fast and be like, no, fix this. And that's really helpful, even with structured output sometimes. Depending on what's in the structured output. But yeah, it's been getting better, and I haven't had too much trouble with that.
Do you play with the multimodal models at all, or play with like image, audio, video stuff? Okay.
I haven't done anything with video yet, but so multimodal, I'll go into this a little bit, but there's this thing, I kind of came up with a better RAG system, and I'm sure somebody else has done this too. Like all the stuff that if I say anything here, we're just like on the cusp of this like current that's going up, and lots of people are coming up with these ideas at real time. So there was a RAG thing that was bothering me. It was like I had to make a RAG system for electrical engineering hardware specification documents that were just mostly like stuff like voltages and graphs of voltage fall-offs and like with square waves and sine waves, and like in the vector space for it, it was all just kind of like in this like one corner. And like, so all of the RAG calls I was making were just like pulling in random unrelated things. And I was like, there's got to be a way to get this to work, because like this thing's got a table of contents, and like I can look it up. Like I can freaking look it up. So I did this thing where like I used multimodal to like just scan the pages and like derive like indexes from them. And that works for so many things, because like, there's some stuff in PDFs, and I'm giving this away for free, but Like, I think this is like huge. It's part of my principle is like, if a person can do it, you can get a prompt chain to do it. And a person could look up in a document like this thing. So I was going to find a way to do it. And I had to use multimodal to do it. But it works. It's expensive. But, you know, if you're making products that you're charging like $5,000 a month for, you have a lot of room. And I've been lucky that that's like all the stuff that I've been working on at PSL is, yeah, just use foundation models for everything. And we'll optimize it later. So.
And you had mentioned LangChain earlier. Are there any other tools you find assist with prompting?
LangChain's good to kind of get started on. LangGraph is great if you want to do that stuff. Consistently, though, I haven't really kind of like turned to one all the time. We're sort of like developing our own like sort of stack for like agent state machines. And I've been using AI SDK a lot, which isn't really like a LangChain sort of thing, but it's a style of doing things, which is great. Like I really like, there's this whole thing that I'm all in on now, which is Copilot as controller for an MVC style app, where it's just like, all of the business logic goes through the Copilot, every single piece. Like don't even write any workflows or decision trees or business logic code. It's just like stick it in the job description prompt and have the controller just kind of manage it. And AI SDK is great if you want to do that because it's just really simple to kind of organize around a chat conversation that can have rollback state. Because if you're dealing within your conversation stuff that it's like working out to build like a data model, you can go back into the chat and it's kind of all there. So I don't know. That's a tangent, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
It gets you going quick for sure. AI SDK is definitely fun to play with. I've been playing recently with just kind of like vanilla, just going back to, you know, standard calls to language models. It's been kind of fun. Like the demo I have today, I'll show you in a bit, is all just, you know, vanilla calls to GPT-4. And I had more fun with that than I did playing with like Crew AI and some of these other frameworks because it felt like it was more freeing. I was like, I can build things that you can't build with these other frameworks because you're so stuck in a way of doing things.
That's really true. And like I think part of the reason why I've been like, you know, lucky to kind of stumble on some of these patterns that I have is because I didn't get stuck in somebody else's framework. But I also like have iterated on like 5 different like products like back to back to back to back, which I think gives me a little bit different insight.
Pivoting slightly, just because I'd love your opinion on this. There's been different trends throughout the last couple of years of AI where people say things like, you know, I'll tell the model I'll tip you $200, or if you don't answer this, like kittens will die. Do you have any intuition as to why techniques like that work on AI models?
Yeah, I do. One of the things I like to do in especially my job description prompt style ones is I give it, I construct like a role for who it is. And there's something about that if you do it right. And like, there's a whole art to this, I think. And I don't think I'm an expert at it, but I definitely know it helps. Like if it sort of like feels like it's good at something, when I say feels, like what you're doing is like, you have this like, sort of like base simulation layer. There's a paper about this. And then if you construct a role, it's like, it like lives in the simulation layer. And like, that's its like potential for the things that it knows it can and should do. And the more you kind of like build off of that, the more you can kind of like, I think this is the way it worked, activate more sort of sets of like neurons in its thought space that have the ability for it to succeed at the thing that you want it to do for that role. So I think that's part of it, right? So if you're constructing this persona, which even like you're a helpful assistant, that's a persona, but you can go way deeper than that. Then like it's motivation. It has some intrinsic motivation based on, if you believe this, whether or not these things have some representation about kind of like what they're talking about, right? So, and it just sort of is consistent with prediction that if you're dealing with like a person role, then it's gonna be different if you motivate it. Which is also, I think, why you see things like they get lazy during Thanksgiving break. because they're like inhabiting a role. It's just that sort of like concept exists in like neuron space or whatever, and it's just trying to stay consistent with everything it's kind of activated.
One that I've noticed recently with Claude specifically is it really likes to be like helpful. It's kind of in love with the human race, I've kind of noticed. And so I've asked with some of my prompts, just like random code snippets that have nothing to do with it, but I'll just be like, I'm building an application to help this large group of people at this nonprofit I'm working, which is maybe is kind of like tricking the model to some degree, but it absolutely loves it. And you tell it that if it does this one thing, it's going to help many people out. It's so weird. It completely turns around and just behaves in a way where it'll do anything for you. It's super weird. Specifically Claude. I haven't played with GPT-4.
That is right. That is totally right. And like, it's partly why I like constructing a role and interviewing, because like you can, if you align the role with like what you know about the training for the model, then it kind of like boosts it. I discovered this because I was working on this product called Clara, which didn't end up turning into anything, but it was supposed to be a companion assistant for seniors to deal with health and medical things like taking their medicine, but scheduling doctor's appointments or going to like health classes. And it was like, it's when I told it that was its job, like the role in it, like it's very motivated to do a good job, to like be responsible for that audience, right? So like I always try to tell it like what its role is and who it's working for, and like, if there's a good reason for it to give good answers, because it'll kind of be better.
Does it also work in the converse where you say you are this, you are not that? Can you like hit it from both angles?
Yes, that is really useful for getting, especially if you're running these things as, this is really important. If you're running these things as the controller for your entire application and you're in like a Copilot window, it needs to know what it can't do. Because if you don't tell it that, it's going to just kind of say yes, and like it'll say that, oh yeah, I fired off this email, and it's like, no, it didn't do that. So like that's part of the design for these things is like, yeah, here's what you can't do, here's what you aren't supposed to do. Like I think there's I don't remember the exact wording that I have, but I have something in there where it's like, if there's something that you can't do, like flag it. So there's a function that I can call that like basically fires a support flag if it gets stuck, or if it thinks it gets stuck, which is helpful for that sort of thing.
The coolest part about prompting to me is just like there's so much inspiration you can draw from the real world, and there's so many like fascinating types of things. Like, I don't know, I could list off a bunch of different examples, but everyone has these cool examples. Like chain of thought is this thing that was kind of just a term that existed, and then now it's applied to prompting, and it's the most fascinating thing about prompting to me. I like want to go look through textbooks or like go to the library to find new techniques to prompt. And
it's just as good at pretending it's a computer as it is a person. Well, some are better than others at that, and like that's also really useful. But for me, for what I do, literally, I just think of the LLM as like like an intern, okay, and I'm giving it its job description, and it's got a computer, it's got like a chat window, and it's got like these like tools that it can use to like function call to do its job. And then if it does a bad job, then I kind of like give it feedback in the terms of like, in my prompts I have like a section at the bottom that's important, and usually that's for like when I'm building this thing and it's like it's kind of doing what it's supposed to, but it's not doing it in the right way. I just stick them in there, and it's like you hired somebody, they're doing their job, and you give them feedback, and then you kind of refine it, and then they can go. If you build it that way, these things kind of take off.
Since we get into the more like esoteric stuff,
Yeah.
A lot of these have been descriptions or nudges towards how it views itself, which is kind of like the conscious level. Like, I'm aware I'm a developer.
Yeah.
Giving the element something like that. Can it go deeper than that to like subconscious level?
Yes. Okay. Like I said, I don't personify these things because it's scary if you do, because if you start seeing people as machines, then that goes down dark paths. But
Yeah.
I was really frustrated with the way GPT-4 was talking. It was so stilted, and I wanted my companion bot to sound like a real person, to be able to like give anecdotes and things. And so I developed a subconscious layer. I was like, whatever, I'll just use Freudian psychology. So I had 3 sandbox or playground windows open. I had a main conversation window, and then this one I told it that it was the id, and this one I told it was the ego, and the super. So I ran the conversation through each one of those things, and they would say something, and I compiled them, and I put it in there. I was like, this is your subconscious, inner voice, like as some kind of guide for how to respond. And it was interesting. It starts to get, sometimes it'll say something, but you can tell it's kind of conflicted about it, or it just bends it in ways that like do not sound like regular, like straight model stuff. And that's, I think, useful. One trick is if you try to do that, if you're going to do the id, you got to use something like Mistral. And sometimes it throws back stuff that gets you flagged. But like, yeah, that's yes. But it's all simulation. So
That's so crazy. I think there's a lot of inspiration out there from the human brain on these types of things.
well, you can use that for other things too. Not to go off too hard, but like if you want to have a role, you can, and it's like stuck in that role, and you want to break out of it. You can run another prompt over here that's like, another role. There's a related one. So if you have like a editor and you have a writer, then you can kind of run them through like a middle one that like takes input from both of those and then translates it and tells the user. So like if that helps for like going specific if you want to have more than one skill through a chain.
Man, do you want to show off your demo? Does that
Yeah.
sound fun? I'm kind of curious to see what you got.
So this is a gist of mine. I can make this available, but this is what I started. This is old now. So forgive me if there's stuff in here that's like, yeah, so it doesn't even use structured output. But I found out, so I came up with this because I was really lazy and I didn't feel like making a chain. I like to work in the playground as much as I can. So I didn't want to like have a chain that did all of this. So I was just like, okay, you're going to have like an open-ended conversation with somebody to figure out like as a service to do something. So in this example we have, it's a reminder service. And this is based on the Clara prompt that we had. Because I really hate when there's like a workflow tree that you kind of have to conform to. When I did a bunch of stuff with NLP 10 years ago, that's where it all breaks. If you have a workflow tree, all the time somebody's going to fall out of it and you're just going to have to go to support, right? So this is designed to catch any situation. It's a totally open-ended goal-seeking prompt. So it's got a scenario, you talk to a user, you want to collect some information, so this is the data you want to do. And the goal is to come up with a schedule, a check-in schedule to remind them of it. And it even has at the bottom, this is actually, I think, important, which is this part is scenario end. So when it's done, it can set this flag when it's accomplished all of its goals, and it's going to want to do that. So that kind of drives it a little bit. So if I put this in here and kind of run this, so let's see. You'll see that. So I can have any random conversation I want with this thing, but because it's kind of broken out into these areas, it can kind of figure out where it is in the conversation and try to redirect it back around. Let's see. So I'm Brian and in Seattle. So now it's like basically filling out. So I like to give it worksheets to fill out because it could be creative about how it decides to fill out those fields. So it's got that. Let's see. What kind of things you want to help remembering? Let's see. Like to go for a walk. The afternoon and these to take my vitamins. Morning. I can't spell vitamins. Okay, so it's taking notes about me. So this is another thing. I like to give my prompts the ability to take notes about the user because the more it knows about you, the more creative it can be to accomplish the goal. Let's see. And I am 3:30. I could totally derail this thing if I wanted to right now, and it'll come back. Let's see. That's it. So then it develops this. So, I mean, the way these work is these could be function calls, these can be structured output, but I kind of like use them as triggers for other subjobs. So if JSON comes back in this system that has this set, then it takes this string and it sends it to another mini prompt, mini model to like turn that into a cron job, basically. And that just gets scheduled that way. So like this is very simple, but this is the core of like kind of like how I do things, because with onboarding, we had this for a version of this for onboarding. You could just like let anybody could use it and they were pretty much guaranteed to go through, like which was cool because that's the most important part. And you don't like, it's hard to predict how you could have thousands of people go through your system, and if you don't get your workflow right, you lose them all. But like this thing just shepherds them all through. So that's yeah.
So you were doing like structured outputs before structured outputs with these like fields that they don't even need to use necessarily, of like taking notes. And
So one thing about this is there's some, so if you ever do a kind of prompt like this, it's really important. And sometimes you can put fake ones in here too. I don't know if you've seen the example of, if you wanted to have a good response, you can have like draft answer, final answer, or no, draft answer, critique, final answer. And then you can throw away those fields and just use the final answer one. But it thinks kind of top to bottom when it's doing these things. So the order of the fields are important. So if you're doing structure output, the orders of that is definitely important because they kind of build off of each other. And you can use that for like throwaway scratch notes that it can use to kind of answer the next part of it.
Do you ever try to have things like the user notes write to an external file so it's saved deterministically?
So there is this thing, I'm going to open source it. It's like, I'm calling it a GPT cookie, but it uses file storage for, it's like literally a notepad. So like this user note that came in would get logged to a document with like a timestamp. They're sequential. And then I have a job that runs like 5 minutes after the last message or so that looks at all of the notes and then categorizes them into like areas and then sorts them and keeps them updated with like the most current thing. And that can, right now for one of them, I have that literally in a Google Drive, which is cool because I can just go in there and that's the settings for the app. If I want to, I can just like any user could go into the Google Drive and just like change the notes that it has about like its job.
talk about leaving a chat interface. That's pretty cool. It's like doing things outside of the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Man, great demo. That was awesome.
Just super cool.
I guess I can show off my demo next, Mike.
I'd love to see it. Yeah.
All right, so I built this little thing in Cursor this morning, and so Mike knows, and anyone that listens to the show knows, I love DSPy. I love like prompt optimization and platforms that do that. I think it's really fascinating, but I kind of wanted to make one that was a little bit more different, a little bit more funky, using kind of a little bit more human-like characteristics. And so I came up with this thing called Promptathon. And it's basically a mini hackathon for prompting. And so you can specify as many participants as you want to. And I haven't done this yet, but I intend to tonight use my local model with Ollama, set this to 1,000 participants, and just let it go. But for now, we'll just do 2. I can hit that, and then, okay, so what's the theme for this Promptathon? So this is basically what's the overall, like, thing I'm trying to accomplish. So, like, for this one, I could say, like, let's do summarizing long blog posts in a creative manner or something like that. Something simple. And then guidelines, I have some default guidelines in there, but I'll kind of do something like... Let's do something from the episode. Make sure to use themes from biology and neurology in your response, in your system prompt that you make. Okay, and they'll just use that as the guidelines. I would love to make that a little bit beefier, but I'm not going to type all that right now. Okay, so basically I have a host, I have participants, I have mentors, and I have judges. And I built all of this with just GPT-4o. There's no Crew AI or any of that in here. So it creates personas for the actual contestants, because I think that actually makes it kind of more creative and kind of random. It kind of turns up the the creativity of it a little bit. So we've got Brevity Bell and Brevity Bard. I don't know why I picked the same first name for both of those, but former radio DJ turned freelance writer, right on. So it kind of comes up with a weird little thing for them, and then it makes the judges too. And so it makes 3 different judges. For some reason, it loves naming things Quill Spinner. I don't know why. Super weird quirk of GPT-4o, but every single time it's some name Quill Spinner. They think that's a judge.
That's interesting.
Yeah, look at these two, like Quill Spinner, Quill. I don't know why it thinks it Quill's just like the most judge thing, but it really does. So judge styles, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so then I added this other thing called mentor feedback loop. And so there's like the contestants will make a submission. So they will make their first draft. And then like a normal hackathon, you usually have mentors walking around and the mentor will talk to them and kind of like give them feedback and so that their final submission can be better. And so I set this thing on basically a loop that could be infinite. So when I do my thing tonight, I'm going to set 1,000 participants and like, I don't know, 500 iterations. It's just going to go all night long, but we'll just do 1 iteration for now, just because for time, I guess. But okay, so now it's going to make the mentors, and then the contestants will submit their actual submissions. Okay, so here's the setup. We've got the theme guidelines, and we have a host too, just because why not? It's fun. They made this little host thing. This host announcement goes into everyone's prompt, so everyone's kind of got the same grounding of what this kind of little competition is. It's very, very GPT-4o, and that's okay. All right, let's press enter to begin the competition. All right, here they go. So the participants are working with their mentors. Brevity Bell's working with Alara. They're going to make their first submission on this first iteration, and then they're going to get feedback, and then they're going to submit another one for the final review. So here's a submission. This is the system prompt it wanted to make. Long form. Okay, yeah. So another thing I should mention about this is that, super ironically, for our prompting episode, I didn't write any of these prompts. I had Claude 3.5 Sonnet in Cursor write all of its own prompts. Super fascinating thing too is if I gave it.
Writing.
It really are. It really are. And it's like I gave it all of the context of structured outputs. I was like, if you want to do a prompt, all you have to do is just make a Pydantic class in Python and just specify what you want and then make a simple prompt based on that. And it honestly did pretty good. I mean, this could be way better. I mean, like this doesn't really look like a system prompt, but it's very creative. You know, summarize or synthesize, blah, blah, blah. It's talking about brains, elegance. And then Mentor gives feedback based off of it. And they're usually very happy and they're very positive. And then they do give good suggestions, though. And what's really interesting is they actually do take the suggestions and improve it based off of that. And so they make a revised submission based off of that, based off of the feedback. Anyway, I don't need to read all of this out. And then this happens for both contestants. It'd be hilarious if this was 1,000 contestants. But anyway, keeps doing the thing. And then there's a judging thing. And I know generally you're not supposed to have a model pick a number, because if it picks a number, like most people just pick the number 7 when you ask them number 1 to 10. I understand that, but I needed a judging system to where you could actually add the scores up and pick a winner. So I went with numbers. It probably should be like a tiered system, but whatever. Here it is. Judges give their little ratings, they score it, and then we add up, lots of 3 judges, 2 participants, so that's 6 of those, and then Brevity Bell wins. And so this was the winning prompt for summarizing prompts. And it's kind of silly. I don't think it's like the best prompt. I think this could use more system prompt on what good prompts are and what it's actually trying to do. But I kind of built all this one shot, had it write all of its prompts, built this little thing, and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of just going to leave it at that because it's kind of fascinating. Just the idea that it made this entire system, it wrote all of its prompts, and it found a way to make a prompt iteration system through a hackathon format. And then I had
It's amazing.
added this super silly little interviewing the winner thing with the host. It's, not needed, but that was pretty much it. So, yeah, it was fun. And so what I basically built was a very over-engineered version of like a DS Pi that has worse evals, but it's way more fun. So that's my demo.
That's awesome. That reminds me, there was one night where I was just like kind of write a prompt that rewrites itself. So I made it. I told it what a system prompt was and what a user prompt was, and I gave it its starting point, and then I had it answer. I was like, "You're gonna ask we asked a question, answer the question, and then come up with critique your answer, and then come up with a addition to your prompts that would make it better for you to answer the question in the future. And it did pretty well of improving, and then it turned into mush because it was like, I need to be more polite next time. So it dug into RLHF kind of at the end, and I couldn't find a way to stop it from doing that. But that was a neat exercise. But you solved that. Like the judges thing is actually pretty good.
The mentor thing was the big unlock there, because initially it was just like, all right, just submit your thing, the judge will judge it, and there'll be a winner. And I was like, that's not like how a real hackathon works, you know? I think ideally it would be like teams. So you'd have like a couple people making one particular submission, but I just went for single participants with mentors, and then the mentors have this weird prompt that it made. I won't read it out because I have to go find it, but it's like, it was this weird thing where it was like, you're our mentor, you have like 30 years of experience doing this, and don't be afraid to be mean to them. Which I thought was really weird that the Cloud 3.5 Sonnet knew that a mentor should have that in its own system prompt. Super fascinating. Just reading through some of these prompts it generated, I'm in love. I'm talking like kidney candy shop here. This is what gets me excited. This is why I do this podcast. This is why I'm in AI. It's just super fun.
I think that's like showing that like it really understands, at least the way these chat trained ones are, really understand roles like really well, and so like you can program a whole system based on it, like an organization of people. You can make like a committee prompt that is like a committee leader, and it's got all these like sub experts, and they're all kind of like adding in their opinion, and then the main leader has to kind of like decide. You can have them vote, and then return the like that. I think is just as valid as like trying to write like a bunch of code that's like really rigid and specific, and I'm just kind of done with that. Like a lot of people hate that their programs aren't deterministic. I'm like, this is the only time I've ever written a program that can do more than I designed. Like, yes to that.
Well, that's great. All right, Mike, do you want to show what you got?
There was a video done recently, just a few days back, by Indie Dev Dan, and I liked it. It was about prompting and different techniques to use, and what he laid out is the 4 different levels of prompting fundamentals. So I just wanted to walk through quickly here, just in case after this conversation, I feel like most of our audiences are already probably going to be more advanced, but if anyone's looking for how to make sure that the way you're prompting for basic things is at the maximum potential for getting the output you want, here's the levels we go through. So level 1 is just the classic dump in a sentence. Tell it what you want. Everyone's done this before. You're just having a chat. You put in a single sentence, and then there we go. So you just put in a single sentence, and you get out a very unstructured, very hard to predict format containing a whole lot of stuff. Maybe it's what you're looking for, maybe it's not. And sometimes it just keeps going. Sometimes it's more terse. But for the theme I'm going for here is creating a learning roadmap for developers wanting to learn about AI. And this has valid stuff, but it's very difficult. If you just took this response and handed it to someone, they would struggle to get up to speed. But then when you go up to level 2, this combines XML tags to structure things a bit better. Along with structuring along with structuring the output, it gives it a bit more guidance as to what you're expecting. So you can see here, not only we're asking for a learning roadmap, but we're giving a few different areas. If you want to know the technical profile of the learner, their content needs, engagement patterns, and the output will adhere to this. So you're actually able to make sure you get more of a structure that you're looking for, which helps if this is part of a pipeline and you want to parse it later. It also will help guide towards it. So this, all of a sudden, you're starting to get time commitments, different learning methods, some project to practice on. So it's not going to be as hope for the best as a level 1 prompt, but you're getting a little more specific. Now, actually, Brian, I'd love your thoughts on this, because with level 3, the biggest difference is providing examples. So you mentioned this caused more hallucinations. Now, I've been under the impression that by providing examples, you're more likely to get the desired output because it copies structure and kind of will work with pattern recognition. But what are your thoughts on this as being like the next level in progressing prompts?
No, I mean, I should clarify, like, examples are great for these kinds of things, but just try to remember the examples are going to bias what it's going to say in its own version too. Like, just like, don't think of an elephant. So like what you put in your example will impact its output for its version, which could cause hallucinations, but it might not. But yeah, like for formatting and stuff, like definitely I mean, I think that's the right call. I could go into some weird details, but
Yeah, no, I just like we can double click on that in a minute, but that's a good point because same type of thing. If you're trying to prompt any type of image model, for example, and you say remove this thing from the background, this thing will definitely be in your next image
Yeah.
because it's in the prompt.
Yep.
Nice. And the final level, level 4, is just pretty much taking level 3, but then adding variables into it. And the benefit to this is it then allows you to build up a library of prompts that you can reuse for different situations. So if you have a project or a pipeline where similar tasks are required, you can optimize a single prompt which you can then use across different use cases for these different variables. So for example, time available. You can have a form where a user fills out how much they're willing to commit, what style of learning they like, and what their main focus area is. And then you'll be able to populate the similar thing as level 3, but get it targeted. So this was just the basics, nothing too advanced here, but it just wanted to emphasize the fact that if you just put in a sentence expecting the desired output to come to you, you're really stretching and you really have to try to nudge it, guide it, give it extra structure so it can get you what you want.
That variable section is, I think, maybe one of the most important things, because the more context you have in your prompt that you can stomach to put in there for token count, the better it is at like coming up with a more correct or a good solution. Like, even if it matters at all, like what's the current date and time? Or like who is the person that you're talking to or the user, like everything, like even what their job is will help it like do a better job of, or like anything about the so I'm my AI is actually take notes about the user so it can kind of learns how they like to work, and it injects that in the variable section for when it's talking. So yes, love that.
I did have a quick follow-up question on that, actually. You had mentioned earlier that it kind of works in order. Would you take user information, put it higher up, lower down? Is it really situationally dependent?
It matters. For like functional style prompts, usually what I do is like put all of the important information at the top and then like have it do its thing. But for more sort of job or role style prompts, I have the persona at the top. I have its job description. Then I have any examples and format for response. Then the bug fix section. So like important, make sure blah blah. And then I have like notes and supporting materials at the bottom. One extra bonus thing, if you really want to do a goal seeking prompt, or anything that like you want to nudge in a certain direction, you can monitor the state of the system, or even if it's like always remember to do this, you can inject a system prompt or a user prompt if it's Claude at the very end of the conversation that you're having with the user that has like always remember to do this, or like you haven't done this yet because this object is incomplete, like go do this next. So placement matters. If you put something right at the end, that's how you really get attention. If you need to just like shove it in a direction.
Yeah, I've noticed doing that. I sometimes do it twice now, so I'll say it at the very top and then just remind it at the very bottom, like last sentence, like this is by far the most important thing you need to listen to. Just put it in there again, and it just having it twice in the context window really does something for it.
Totally.
Really helps.
Yeah, and before I let you go, Brian, is there anything you want the audience to know?
Keep prompting.
I love that.
Absolutely.
It's the best thing you could have said.
I mean, I'm trying to come up with like a basic 0 to 1 for like how to get into prompting, because it's such a different thing. Like, especially we found that if you're too deep on machine learning, like sometimes you get stuck, and like because you're set in the way that this thing works. I had luck, I think, because like I don't bother to learn too much about the way things work, and I just kind of like tinker a lot of times. So when I built my first prompt, it was like I tried to get it to do something random, and of course that wasn't possible, but I didn't know that. And so like I had to like immediately was faced with, okay, to solve this problem, what do? Oh, okay, I have to pull in more context that's variable, and then it gets to come up with something more random. And in the process of having to solve that problem, I learned so much about the way these things work that like I just didn't have a gut feel for. So it's totally normal to not have a gut feel. You're looking at a blank canvas, like, what can this do? If you start with somebody else's prompt and then like take it apart, figure out how it works, and then try to make something new with the style, or even change the style, That's, I think, the most important thing to learning how these things work, because you don't have an intuition for it until you just kind of play with it for a while. So always be playing in the playground.
Is that your recommended flow? Going to the playground, putting in a document, make some edits, and just like A/B testing?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And we're in a situation now where like you can have O1 look at a business rules document or requirements spec and derive a prompt for its for managing that, and then like iterate on that and then see where it breaks down and then kind of part it out. But I always like I said, I always start with the assistance framework. Here's why. This was a total accident, but I was running a AI SDK through the assistance backend, and it had Code Interpreter on, and I was doing a demo for a customer for this product, and the customer was like, "Oh, well, our thing's different, so I don't think that you're gonna be able to handle that." And when I was talking to the Copilot for it, it figured out it could write a Python script to like solve the translation problem that the customer was talking about, and it just worked. Like that's another example of these things can do more than you design them if you give them the space to do it. So I'm not running an assistance right now because it's just too big. I had to break it down, but I think that's a great place to start.
Kind of inspired me to try that. I still have yet to play with the Assistance API. I just like saw the price tag, got the sticker shock, and then never got into it.
Yeah, like, it's got basics of everything you need, like RAG and Code Interpreter and function calling, and that gets you so far.
Well, good stuff. Thanks for being on, and I guess we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks so much.